we'll kind of just see what we want to do with the couple of remaining classes we have left, I feel. Given the way I started this semester on my back foot, I feel pretty good about how far we have come. Any questions about stuff, course-related stuff, anything like that? You feel pretty good? Okay. So let's just finish up then. I mean, we basically know what's happening with the temporary intrinsics and Merrick's on temporary intrinsics, but I wanted to just make the last couple of steps official, because we remember, right, what Merrick's wants to do is say, look, when we think carefully about what this phrase means, where everywhere it appears, all over the place, there end up being kind of two ways to understand this argument more carefully, and on neither way of understanding the argument does it actually pose a problem. Well, I keep saying argument, you know, right? Two ways of understanding this apparent inconsistency. And on neither of the two ways of understanding it more carefully does it pose a problem for endurance, at least endurance of a Merrixian stripe. Right, so that's the structure. And last time we talked about one interpretation, so interpretation number one, I'm going to leave one as it is. 2 star becomes at T, O exists and is bent. 3 star at T prime, O exists and is bent. And then this one, which will take me a moment, if O at T equals O at T prime, oops, I lost track of my T's here, sorry. Then at T, O exists and is F, if and only if at T prime, O exists and is F. All right, so the idea is one way of spelling out what these are saying in particular is that the at T is modifying both the kind of O in the sense of modifying when O exists, but is also modifying the is bent. And this is what Merrick's calls the more natural reading of the argument, and I think I finally understand what he means by that years later. Because on this reading, we can say both of these premises are true, right? And I think that's really what he's getting at. But this is no longer a statement of the indiscernibility of identicals. It's a much stronger claim that doesn't follow from the logic of identity. And so now an endurantist can say, So we avoid the problem by, on this interpretation, rejecting 4. And so we don't have to reject 1. Good? Yeah. That's mostly what we did before the exam, but I just kind of wanted to review it quickly. I see the wheels turning there, Jackie. How's it going?
Is 3 star supposed to be and is not bent?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Subtle difference, but important.
Yeah, that's a pretty important difference. It would be harder to generate an inconsistency without it. Good. Thank you. Good catch. Okay. So that's interpretation 1. Interpretation 2, and now I'm going to write this a little differently than the way Merrick's does, because I think his way of doing it is it introduces complications that I think don't actually help. So call it 2 double star. And what we're going to do here is revert back. So remember, he did all that work to tell us what this means, right? And the second interpretation then is just literally applying his analysis of O at t. But the trick is we've got to kind of indicate the structure a little more carefully. So what I'm going to do is write it like this. The thing that is O and exists at t is bent. So I've unpacked the O at t as a description, and I'm just putting it in brackets so that it's absolutely clear, kind of that this is one grammatical unit, and then we're tacking on the is bent at the end of it. Does that, everybody see what I'm doing with that convention there? And so then we know what 3 double star is going to be. The thing that is O and exists at t prime is not bent. And now again, the fun one. If, I'm just going to leave it as O at t up here just to make my life easier, equals O at prime, then okay, so I'm not bothering to write all this shit out again. You all know. So it's just, right, this one is that. This one is that. Everybody following my conventions that are going to keep me from scribbling a lot of stuff on the board that you can't read anyway? Okay. Okay. So what goes wrong here? And now we're actually coming back to Skyley's original observation. We'll come back to your thoughts, Skyley?
Yeah. So I think Eric's was saying that the first premise, O at t equals O at t prime, is saying that there's only one object, O, and then 2 and 3 say that O is bent and O is not bent, but that's contradictory because you can't be simultaneously bent and not bent.
That's exactly right. So let's think about what's going on here, because remember, the whole point is of his analysis of O at t, right, is that it's got 2 aspects. There's what it refers to, and there's how it describes, right? Everybody remember that? But the thing is that when you've got a description like this, so, you know, the puppy Jeff owns is sleeping, assuming that, right, the object that we're being referred to here actually fits that description. The truth of this statement just depends on the object itself, right? The description, once the description has been satisfied, you're not worried about kind of, that description doesn't factor into the truth or falsehood of the statement. And so this ends up amounting to saying Bella is sleeping, because the description isn't doing any work. What's walk me through, Jackie, walk me through.
I don't have to, I'll get back to you.
Okay,
I'll get
okay.
back.
If we take that seriously, though, then we get exactly what Skyley said, because 2 double star is just equivalent to saying O is bent, and 3 double star is equivalent to saying O is not bent. And now we have an inconsistency just in these 2 statements, right? And so one of them isn't true. One of these two, it can't be true, since they both can't be true, so one of them has to be false, but whichever one we reject, we avoid the original inconsistency without rejecting one. Yeah, all right. What happened there? That got Jordan scowling. That's good. This seems like kind of a fast one, doesn't it? What the hell is going on here? So yeah, Hyder, go ahead.
I still don't really get how you eliminate the T and T prime.
How what?
Why it's O is bent and not O at T is bent.
Because once you unpack the meaning of O at T in the way Merrick's wants, you get this description,
Okay.
right? This description either picks out an object or it doesn't. What object does it pick out? It picks out O. And once it's picked out O, then the job of the description is done. And so now the truth of the sentence just depends on whether what we're saying about that object is true or not. All right? And so once we unpack the description this way, the work of the at T is done in picking out the object. And then the at T has done its job and it is no longer relevant. Just like the fact that, right, I own Bella is only relevant in kind of telling us who we're talking about. And once we figured that out, the truth or falsehood of this statement just depends on whether that thing is sleeping.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Does
Yeah.
that help kind of clarify a little bit? I think Jordan scowled deepened while I was saying that, so I'm not sure that helped.
So you said that there has to be like an inconsistent link or inconsistency in either 2 or 3.
No, so I'm saying that 2 and 3 together cannot both be true when interpreted this way. That's the move that Merrick's is making, right? He's saying, look, so if you interpret what these statements mean this way, then 2 and 3 cannot both be true because they amount to asserting a simple contradiction. It's like, so consider the following analogy. Let's see if this helps. So the puppy Jeff owns is sleeping. The puppy Sarah owns is not sleeping. Different descriptions, yes, right? But as a matter of fact, the descriptions pick out the same thing. And so the difference in description doesn't actually help avoid a contradiction. These two statements contradict each other even though they're describing Bella in different ways. And that's what Merrick's is saying is going on here. These two statements contradict each other even though they're describing the object O in different ways. Does that clarify a little more the move?
Yeah, I understand it more now. I just don't
Okay.
like it.
Yes, whether we should like it is a fully open question. That I'm quite happy to grant. Hyder, what's up?
Well, so if you're describing it differently, wouldn't it make sense that the two O's are different O's? Because over there you're talking about the same puppy, but say someone else, the puppy Jack owns is not sleeping. And now you're talking about two separate puppies. One could be Bella, the other could be Sally. And
So that's
there
true.
really isn't a contradiction between those two then.
So there's a very good point here. So it depends on the description, right? That's right. If I talk about, the puppy Jeff owns is sleeping, the puppy Jamie owns is not sleeping, there's no contradiction there. Absolutely, right? So what that shows is that whatever kind of contradiction is going on here, we should be careful. It's not a logical contradiction. You can't, from these two statements, prove that they're contradictory. You need some information about the world, namely that Bella is both the puppy Jeff owns and the puppy Sarah owns. Right, so it's not a contradiction in the sense of a logical contradiction, but as a matter of fact, these statements cannot both be true. And that's really all that Merrick's needs, because he just needs to say, right, how do we get out of the original contradiction if we read those statements this way? Then one of these two is false. Which one? I don't care, right? Depends on whether O is bent at this moment or not, kind of thing, right? So, but you're right, it's not a logical contradiction in the way that these seem to generate a logical contradiction, but it's still the fact that these two statements can't both be true. Does that clarify? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do get like the point he's making, but I still find it weird that it's the way it's phrased, because we know both of them are true.
Well, right? And I think that's why he leads with this interpretation, because I think what he's trying to do is saying, look, yeah, right, we think intuitively both of these statements are true, but to make sense of that, he thinks, we have to understand them this way, right? It's that when we say O at T is bent, what we really mean is that that object is bent at that time, in some sense, right? But remember, he wants to unpack that in a way where we don't take bent at to be kind of the fundamental notion. So he thinks this gives us a true reading of 2 and 3, but a principle that's not the indiscernibility of identicals. This reading gives us a principle that is plausibly a version of the indiscernibility of identicals, but then one of 2 or 3 has to be false. And so, right, the where the problem arises differs in the two interpretations, and that's kind of the subtlety of his response. Good. Jackie, yes, I have.
So back to number 1. So for these interpretations,
Back to number.
can you like we, just so I get this right, like we don't include number 1 in these interpretations because like they. What's the purpose of not including number 1 again?
The 2 purposes. 1, I'm lazy.
Okay.
And
I just
2,
didn't know, like.
yeah, I mean 2, it's not really going to change.
Okay.
He's just-
okay.
Yeah.
So okay, that's.
Yeah, no, because remember, this is the one that Merrick's wants to keep, because this is the statement that he thinks kind of encapsulates what endurance means. And so this is just, he's trying to say, I'm just going to assume this is true, and I've got to find a problem elsewhere. And so that means the problem has to be in 2, 3, or 4. That's why those are the only ones I copied down. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, good. I think that's a good point, because I realized I did leave it out, but yeah. I wanted to just make sure that I didn't write more than I needed to, and so, the more I write, the less legible it is. Jordan, what's up?
Okay, so bear with me.
Okay.
So can you reject interpretation 2 if you accept trope theory? If you consider bentness to be an abstract particular of O, that is a part of O and can't be separated from it, can you just say that interpretation 2 is wrong?
I don't think so, but I'm actually not sure. Say a little more about what you're thinking about. That's interesting. I'm not sure how to think about this yet. What do you?
I was
Yeah.
just thinking because, I don't know, the way that it's separated O and bentness so distinctly kind of just made me think well, at least for trope theory, you can't do that because bentness isn't trope, so it is actually tied to the object fully. It is a part of the object, so you can't, the object is made out of the bentness.
I honestly have no idea how to think about that. That's a really interesting question, I mean, so what that's doing in a way is kind of bridging the gap between the two kinds of change that we're worried about, change in properties and change in parts. Because, I mean, presumably if you were an endurantist trope theorist, right, yeah, you would, what would you say? You would say, right, entrope is a part of me now, and now it's not. It's vanished into the metaphysical ether, right? And so we are then, that leads us very quickly to questions of change in parts. And the question whether if something is a part of an object at one time, it has to be part of that object at other times. And that's kind of the next thing we were going to talk about. So this is a nice bridge, but before we come back to that, let's make sure we're good with this. But so I think that the answer would just be, okay, well, now we have to think about changing parts.
Okay.
Less than that it's a separate problem here. But I think, I'm not actually 100% sure of that. I think that's a really interesting question to think about. How's everyone else doing with this? Any other thoughts, questions, observations? Aiden, was that? No.
I think this is good.
Think it's good? Pretty good? Well, feeling all right. Jamie, feeling all right. Alex, feeling all right. Sean, Aiden, yeah. Skylar, you pretty good? You were on top of this one from early on, so this makes sense?
That's the one that made the most sense to me, but
Nice.
probably
Yeah.
just because I didn't really understand it all that deeply, you know, and sort of just had a surface understanding.
Well, I think your grasp of this move was exactly right, but seeing how he gets there after first going through this one is the tricky part. And this, I say, it tripped me up for a half dozen times reading it, because given all the work he's done, this is sort of what you expect him to say first, because this is the analysis that he gave in the damn thing. But no. Okay. All right, so, right, we have logic students. You may recognize the general structure of what Merrick's is doing. He's giving us a dilemma. Right? He's saying there are two ways to interpret it, either this one or this one. On this one, the argument fails. On this one, the argument fails. Conclusion, the argument fails, right? And again, one of the main reasons I like this reading is that argumentative strategy shows up all over the place in philosophy. Right? And, you know, when you are confronted with what looks like a pretty rock-solid logical puzzle like this, sometimes it's the only chance you've got of kind of trying to come up with an objection to it. Identify some term or phrase that's maybe got some ambiguity in it. Clarify that ambiguity. Say, hey, we could interpret this way, or we could interpret this way. And then show that if we interpret it this way, something goes wrong over here. If we interpret it this way, something goes wrong over here. And then what you're kind of doing is showing that the original, what looks kind of logically rock solid, is actually only works because you're kind of implicitly slipping back and forth between these two readings as is convenient. And so that's a very powerful move if you can pull it off. And I think that's what I find Merrick's discussion so interesting. Whether we buy it, because again, he's up to his neck in the A theory, it's still, I think, a very interesting question. So if you're going to be an endurantist, well, looks like as good a way to go as any I can think of. All right. Pretty good? Any other thoughts, questions, observations at this stage? Yeah, Alex, what's up?
Is interpretation too kind of like a presentism thing? Because like time t and time t prime don't exist unless they're the present, so O is currently either event or not.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know if Merrick's would necessarily frame it that way, though I think he actually is a presentist. And so, in a way, I think that's the right way to put it, right? Which of these is in fact true depends on what the case is now. Yeah, is that kind of what you meant?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's exactly right. So, right now, only one of them is true, but, you know, a few minutes from now, the other one might be true, but they're never both. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Good, good, really good question. All right, we're not quite done with all this Merrick's shit, but maybe we're done with temporary intrinsics for a little while. Pretty good? Okay, so let's get rid of some of this stuff. And let's start thinking about change in parts. There is, particularly in the 20th century, there was a sort of several systematic attempts to kind of give a theory of this notion of parthood. So this notion is one that we've met intuitively now a couple of times, or at least once in the trope theory stuff. But it's the general study of this notion of parthood has come to be known as mereology. I think I spelled that right. The kind of theory of parts and wholes. And it can be developed fairly systematically. One of the original motivating ideas here was, so anyone who's done a little bit of mathematics has probably encountered things where you've encountered some set theory where we would see things like this, right? You use these double brackets to indicate a set. And then you have this symbol, which is a primitive symbol for what's usually called set membership. So we read this as Tally is a member of the set that contains both Tally and Bella, right? Sets are mathematical objects, kind of par excellence. And so anyone who is inclined towards nominalism is going to be uncomfortable talking about sets, because as right there, you know, the set containing Tally and Bella is not the same thing as if I just kind of put Tally and Bella here in a pile in front of us, right? Tally and Bella are physical objects, but the set of Tally and Bella is not. It's an abstract object of some kind. So one thought was, let's replace this notion of being an element of a set with some other fundamental notion, like being a part of the whole somewhat weird object that consists exactly of Tally and Bella. And now we've just got physical objects, weird physical objects, because, right, if we think of the thing that is Tally and Bella, that's this weird, like, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Dispersed physical object, right? If Tally's over here and Bella's over here, and we're saying there's one object that is the both of them, right? But if you're nominalistically inclined, you're like, that's all right, because it's just another physical object. I'm cool with that. Just don't give me that set bullshit. So this was part of the idea, right? One of the original motivations was to try to introduce a systematic theory that one hoped would kind of do everything that set theory does without all of the ontological baggage of set theory. Probably doesn't work. That's another story, but at least early in the 20th century, it wasn't yet none of this shit was totally sorted out. It wasn't obvious that it didn't work, and so mereology was developed in a pretty systematic fashion. And so the fundamental notion that was introduced was the idea of part, and you see different symbols for it. We're not going to worry about that. But on the basis of just this primitive notion, we can introduce a bunch of things. So we can talk about the fusion of Tally and Bella, and that's the technical term for the object that is literally just Tally and Bella, right? So talk about mereological fusions or mereological sums. That's the other word that sometimes is used, right? That's just this weird complex object that's meant to stand for the set. And so we can say that Tally is a part of the fusion of Tally and Bella, and that's now supposed to be the mereological equivalent of saying that Tally is a member of the set. Okay? So this is all just kind of background, but I want you to kind of be at least aware of some of it. Was that a hand? No? Okay, just checking. Okay. So when we think about parts, and we think about endurance in particular with, claims like Jeff at T is identical to Jeff at T prime. How does change, so we've already seen that change in properties raises a kind of, at least on the face of it, a challenge. We can maybe do some serious philosophical work to avoid the challenge, but on the surface there's a challenge. What about change in parts? How does the possibility of change in parts, at least on the surface, give rise to a similar problem for endurance? Because remember, we're still in that dialectic where the game is show that endurance has problems, and that's why we should like perdurance, right? How might we characterize the problem that change in parts generates? How are we doing for time? Okay, that's pretty good. What would we say?
When O exists, all of O exists, basically, so a change in parts means that O wouldn't exist anymore.
Nice. Yeah, right? If O is wholly present every time O exists, right? So here I am, wholly present right now, and then I go clip a fingernail. Well, crap. How am I still wholly present if that part of me is gone? And I suppose for concreteness that I don't just clip it, but I incinerate it. So it's just gone, right? So that it's not like, I'm still there, I'm just a distributed object, me and then my fingernail clipping off somewhere, right? The way that the fusion of Tally and Bella is a distributed object. So let's just assume the fingernail is just gone, however we make it gone. Everybody with me? All right. Yeah, that looks like a problem. How am I wholly present if I've lost a part? Yeah? So the challenge, another way to think about this is the challenge of what is called mereological essentialism. And this is a phrase that Merrick's essentialism, that Merrick's uses, right? And let me make sure I get the statement is more or less right, just so that it doesn't cause further confusion. Where are you, mereological essentialism? Yeah, here we go. For any objects, X and Y, and what order do I say things? Right, and any time t, because now we're thinking again about changing parts over time, so we have to keep our discussion of time explicit. Yeah, okay, that's the order I do it. If X is part of Y at t, then X is part of y at every time at which y exists. So if you ever have a part, you always have the part. And so, in other words, right, the parts of an object are essential to that object. And so another way to put the challenge that Skyley articulated was, does endurance entail mereological essentialism? Right? Because how else can we talk about being wholly present at different times? And Merrick's is fairly upfront about this because what does he say? He says, it's supposed to be an A, somehow turned into something weird. An object O is wholly present if and only if all of O's parts exist. Right, this is Merrick's on being wholly present. All right. True or false? What do we think? Curiosity.
False.
Here and false.
I've always thought about this in terms of the degree to which a part constitutes the identity of something.
Okay.
I'll you'll be my professor even if you clip that fingernail. You know what I mean? So I've always thought it in degrees of how important is that part to the whole object.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So it depends on the part.
Yeah.
But that means that there are going to be some parts that it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so it sounds like you're saying false. Because this is saying for any.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is the right? It's a strong claim. It's not saying for some part.
Right.
Right? It's saying for any part.
Right.
And so I take it, if I understand you correctly, I think you want to reject that strong claim.
Yeah, yeah. It's more contingent. If you, got a head injury and lost your identity, then of course, you might not be my professor anymore. You might not be the person who I know, but
Okay.
a haircut or a fingernail is.
Doesn't seem like enough where you're going to be like, what did you guys do with Professor Georgia?
Right, right.
Okay.
So I was just thinking, again, if you add descriptions to it, then I guess we could avoid the problem because, say me right now, and then me later, but with an amputated arm. Just, it's the description that's identifying me, but that's irrelevant because it's still me. And I think that would just avoid the problem of that.
So how do we make sense of the idea that, right, Hyder at T, right, Hyder at T prime, right, they're supposed to be identical. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, you add the description, so same way with the second interpretation of the
Okay.
previous one. And it's just, me who exists with an arm and me who exists without an arm.
Okay, so the thought is something like this. H at T has, I'm just going to call it capital A arm as a part, right? H at T prime. Let's see, let's do it more carefully. Arm is part of H at T. Arm is not part of H at T prime. All right, okay, and so now you want to say, well, how do we unpack these? Is that the idea? All right, so interpretation 1 at T arm what? Exists and H exists, blah blah blah, and arm is part of H at T prime, all the existence shit, and arm is not. How does this help? How have we made progress here? So the claim is both of these are true. Okay. But we still, how are you wholly present at both times? That's still the worry.
Okay.
Does that, right? I mean, if you're wholly present here, how can we still say you're wholly present here? Because I think the intuitive worry is that we've gone beyond just the simple identity claim now to this further claim that all your parts exist. I think you're on to something here, but I think we need to say a little bit more. I mean, what does Merrick say about this? Does anybody?
I mean, now that you describe it that way, I'm just starting to think that maybe I'm just not wholly present at a different time. It's, me and disabled me are two different.
I mean, that's not what Merrick's wants to say, right? He wants to say that you're just as wholly present here, or then, as you are then. But how is he going to do that? Yeah, the pieces are kind of in place, but I've snuck some shit in just a little bit here that we wanna think about. So, when I was introducing mereology, I was talking just about parts, right? But when we get to mereological essentialism, I shifted the language ever so slightly to talking about parts at a time. And I think one way to kind of start to develop what you were suggesting, Heider, is that when you write this, it looks like the at T is just modifying this, right, in familiar Marixian way. And we're using the simple non-temporal modified notion of a part, right? When we shift here, we're trying to make, the at T modify all of this shit. And so really, we're talking at T prime. And now let's kind of put the at T in here. What do we get? What is it for me to be wholly present at a time? For someone like Merrick's. If you think you have an idea but it sounds too annoyingly stupid, you're probably on the right track. What's Merrick's want to say? I'm wholly present at this time just in case.
Your set is present?
No, because he wants to talk in terms of parts, so he doesn't want it to sneak back to set theory. Is that kind of what you meant? No, he wants to take the part talk seriously, but he wants to, yeah.
Is it that, like, you are, like, you exist? Like, you
That's
are
what I was
the
thinking.
thing that exists at T with those parts?
Little more than that. 'Cause, I mean, so he wants to, he wants to talk about being wholly present in terms of parts, right? But what our kind of examples show is that, well, what does it mean to be wholly present at one time and wholly present at another time? This doesn't talk about being wholly present at one time or another. Oh shit, sorry. Alex, quick.
Is it like all of those parts at time t exist at time t?
Yep. That's all it takes according to Merrick's. And so, Hyder's in good shape here, right? He's got all his parts at that time. And at this time, he's got all the parts he has at that time, too. Yeah. It's there's something deeply unsatisfying about this, I think. And, Merrick's can pull it off because of all of the gymnastics he's already done. But it's worth going back to the original Lewis reading where the temporary intrinsics problem was introduced. There's a nice little paragraph where Lewis talks about endarkeners, by which he means people who basically muddy the discussion. And it sure sounds like Merrick's is doing what Lewis thinks the endarkeners are doing. So this is an open question, right? But I leave it there for now. We're done with Merrick's at this stage. We're going to turn to other puzzles involving parts, starting on the Monday after break. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. Good discussion. Thanks for coming today on a snowy, just before a holiday class. I will see you all in